Hello, I'm Ara Najarian, Mayor of the City of Glendale and Chairman of the City of Glendale's commemorative events during the month of April. For the last 9 years, the City of Glendale has produced a week of programs focusing on man's inhumanity to man and the Armenian genocide. Each year, through the hard work of our staff and our committee members, we have put together performances, panel discussions, art displays, lectures, and dramatic performances regarding the Armenian genocide and man's inhumanity to man. It is important that the Glendale community always remember man's inhumanity to man in the many respects that it has taken. In Darfur, in Rwanda, the Holocaust, and the Armenian genocide of 1915. What you're about to see are excerpts from the last 9 commemorative events over the last 9 years that we've put on in the City of Glendale. It is our hope that through these performances and lectures and music that we will always remember that man's inhumanity to man can never be forgiven and it should never be forgotten. At the City of Glendale, we're committed to educating the public and our youth and our seniors that such atrocities must never occur in the world while we're residing in it.
I'd like to welcome all of you to the Glendale Central Library for the first in a series of events planned for the city's Week of Remembrance.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and thank you to everyone for joining us here this afternoon. The purpose of this discussion is, or the topic I should say, is man's inhumanity to man. And there are so many examples of that. We're going to focus on some recent ones as well as ones that occurred several hundred years ago as well.
Looking at the causes of the genocide, studies of genocides in recent years have significantly enhanced our understanding of causes and processes of genocides. Factors contributing to genocide against a certain target group include, for example, racist ideology and propaganda to dehumanize the target group, the presence of some form of military dictatorship with far-reaching territorial ambitions, the exclusion of citizens from meaningful participation in the political process, a situation where the power of the leadership has been challenged or reduced by defeat in war, and finally, the belief on the part of the leadership, the perpetrators, that the international community is not likely to interfere in their internal affairs, and that therefore their genocidal acts are likely to go unpunished.
The existence of anti-Semitism, of hatred of Jews in the world, did not begin with the Holocaust, or what Jews in the Hebrew language call the Shoah. Anti-Semitism is among the oldest forms of organized bigotry in world history. In fact, there were times in which up to 10,000 Jews a day were being murdered in the Auschwitz Center. And the major change that was able to increase efficiency in these camps was the development of a specific gas that had been used to exterminate rats, Zyklon B, which was then refined and used against human beings.
The thinking is that there were at least 3 different waves of Native Americans who came here and became a relatively isolated population. The population decline of Native Americans from that resulting contact with Europeans was severe, was massive. It is estimated that by 1900, and this is a reasonably good figure, by 1900 in the United States there were less than 250,000 Native American peoples.
I appreciate this opportunity to speak about the 1994 genocide in Rwanda, but I do want to focus my comments this afternoon on a genocide that claimed 800,000 lives in a period of 90 to 100 days. In many ways, this was the most efficient genocide in the history of the world, and actually about 80% of those 800,000 people were killed in the first 6 weeks.
Dream that one day the lips that are presently dripping with interposition and nullification will be transformed into a situation where little black boys and black girls, little brown boys and brown girls, little yellow boys and yellow girls, little white boys and white girls, the Asian, the Hispanic, and the Jew, the Native American, the African, and the Sioux, the German, the Eskimo, the Scot, the Italian, the Hungarian, and the Pole, the Armenian, the Ashanti, the Yoruba, and the Kru will be able to join hands, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together. And in knowing when we do this, we can all remain free. America, I want you to hear me. From sea to shining sea, we are family.
This series of events, this is something that a committee put together. A citywide committee was formed and came up with a number of different recommendations to have an event of this sort where we would recognize man's inhumanity to man.
The film is a full-length feature film produced by HBO and first screened a couple of years ago. We are going to pick up the film after Heydrich has led them to the conclusion that simply evacuating the Jews and sending them somewhere won't work. Sterilizing them won't work because they'll still be among us and resentful. They have to be simply disposed of. Some people are disturbed by this. He calls a break. They leave for the break, and then they come back. If you'd start the film, please.
1 year. But I cannot imagine you could operate consistently at that rate, not to mention disposal.
Gas vans are a short-term field solution. We have 3 camps where permanent gas chambers will be operational.
I'm sorry?
Yes, I was about to mention Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka before General Hoffman was taken ill.
It was a fine cigar.
Ultimately, the camps will be the primary locations.
Yes. Now, last summer, Reichsfuhrer Himmler asked me to visit a camp up in Upper Silesia called Auschwitz, which is very well isolated and close to significant rail access. And we are turning that camp into a major center, solid structures. And here's where your Jewish labor comes into play, Herr Neumann. The Jews haul the bricks, and they build the buildings themselves. And when the structures are complete, we expect to be able to process 2,500 an hour. Not a day, an hour.
Dear teacher, I am a survivor of a concentration camp. My eyes saw what no man should witness. Gas chambers built by learned engineers. Children poisoned by educated physicians. Infants killed by trained nurses. Women and babies shot and burned by high school and college graduates. So, I am suspicious of education. My request is, help your students become human. Your efforts must never produce learned monsters, skilled psychopaths, educated Eichmanns. Reading, writing, and arithmetic are important only if they serve to make our children more humane. A civil society, there is no guarantee of that. In fact, when you saw that clip, half the people at that table at the Wannsee conference had PhDs. Many were college professors.
There was supposed to be a 25-year waiting period between the beginning of allotment and the final division of lands. But the dominant whites in the surrounding area came in and forced the Native Americans to sell off excess lands. The 80 acres was not enough to even sustain a farm, let alone the fact that private ownership by men made no sense in a society where women owned property and women owned name. A man holding property was an absurd concept, but it was the only thing that the white government could understand. So in their effort to help these Indians progress and develop, they pushed them off the land. They disenfranchised them. They created a situation where they starved, they died, they resorted to alcoholism.
The Armenians were subjected to a genocidal campaign, he'd said. If elected president, I would ensure that our nation properly recognizes the tragic suffering of the Armenian people. That was before he came to power and before his campaign against Saddam Hussein. George Bush badly needs the help of the new Turkish government. America wants to launch a land invasion of Iraq from Turkey.
You're a strategic ally and friend of the United States. And we look forward to working with you to keep the peace.
The foreign minister said that closing those air bases to American airplanes would be counterproductive or self-destructive because it would hinder our ability to go into northern Iraq. Consequently, just as Dole said in 1990, Turkey benefits from the U.S. In fact, Turkey benefits more from the U.S. than the U.S. benefits from Turkey. And again, defending economic interests is understandable, but at what price? At what price? Where is the morality? Where are the ethical principles when it comes to recognition of a genocide in order to prevent future genocides? Thank you for your attention.
I want to start out by reading the definition of what genocide is. This is a very important month in terms of remembrance of genocides. I want to read an excerpt from the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide, which basically says in Article 2 in the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethical, racial, or religious group. As such, killing members of the group, which includes direct killing, causing serious bodily or mental harm, which includes inflicting trauma on members of a group through widespread torture, rape, sexual violence, forced or coerced use of drugs, mutilation, etc., deliberately inflicting conditions on life calculated to destroy a group, such as withholding of resources, life-giving food and water, etc., prevention of births, forcible transfer of children, and so on and so forth. And genocidal acts don't actually need to kill or cause death, actual death to members of a group. Just the intent itself is, and the actions that lead to genocide are considered crimes.
Now, who do you call when human rights abuses are taking place or when a genocide is underway? Is there a 911 number you can call? And is there a place where the call will be received and help will be sent? This is one of the ethical and political dilemmas that human rights abuses, genocide, Holocaust raise for us.
I'll start off with a personal piece about all this. Because I'm Jewish and because I was a small child when World War II ended, I don't ever recall not knowing that there was a Holocaust. I've always known that it took place. In fact, as a small child, as I recall, I was fascinated with the idea that there was someone out there who wanted to kill me but didn't know me. It seemed perfectly sensible that anybody who knew me would find me aggravating enough to swat me one. But the whole notion that I was an abstraction, subject to slaughter at the whim of someone who didn't know who I was, that scared me, but it also fascinated me. And I guess to some extent that phenomenon, that aspect of genocide, really of man's inhumanity to man, because genocide is part of the most horrible and most modern manifestation of a very old tendency in collective human life.
I know that this is a week of remembrance, but if we really reflect on the month of April, we look at April the 7th as the United Nations international recognition of the anniversary of the Rwandan genocide, where 800,000 plus were brutally murdered. We look at the anniversary of the Cambodian genocide, April the 17th, where 1.7 million Cambodians were murdered, some 24% of the population. We look at April the 18th, which commemorates the murder of 6 million Jews and the remembrance of the Holocaust. And of course, we look at April 24th and the remembrance of the genocide of the Armenians, of the 1.5 million. As I think about these events, Facing History believes, and when we begin to work with young adults and adolescents to reflect upon these historical events, they did not have to happen.
The intention of the Week of Remembrance activities is not to simply draw parallels between any specific genocide, the Armenian genocide or any other atrocities. It is rather to show people instead that any crime committed against humanity is unique with its own special political, legal, historical, and moral consequences.
What I'd like to do is I'm going to show you a clip that I think is very profound, because I think the clip speaks to larger issues about the betrayal of youth and education. And we'll talk about that connection in a moment.
Today is history. Today will be remembered. Years from now, the young will ask with wonder about this day. Today is history, and you are part of it. 600 years ago, when elsewhere they were putting the blame for the Black Death, Casimir the Great, so-called, told the Jews they could come to Krakow. They came. They trundled their belongings into the city. They settled. They took hold. They prospered. In business, science, education, the arts. They came here with nothing. Nothing. And they flourished. For 6 centuries, there has been a Jewish Krakow. Think about that. By this evening, those 6 centuries are a rumor. They never happened. Today is history.
If I can emphasize the words that he said, he says, for 6 centuries there has been a Jewish Krakow. Think about that. By this evening, those 6 centuries are a rumor. They never happened. Today is history.
Six weeks into the genocide, the Security Council finally changed course and authorized over 5,000 more peacekeepers for Rwanda. But none were immediately available.
The UN doesn't have any troops. We borrow them from governments. And I recall on the Rwanda thing, we approached about 80 governments trying to get offers of troops, and they wouldn't give them to us.
I get very emotional when I watch the film, and I think that's part of, we're talking a little bit tonight about film and documentary, and that's probably one of the differences. You develop very strong personal relationships with the subjects in your film, and in this case it became a very difficult thing as a filmmaker to hear these people's stories and to feel their pain.
I can only say one thing. It's not a big deal here about how do we make this thing happen. It's almost like it's a voting situation almost. You want to vote, and you got to go pay that $8. I've always been disappointed in Armenians and non-Armenians that when Arad came out or any other genocide film, somehow there is no interest. And I think we have the responsibility to show the world. And how do you show that? How do you show power? You vote, and then you go pay your $8, your $9. I don't care if it's Arad. I don't care if it's Schindler's List or Ghosts of Rwanda. It doesn't matter. And I think this is the problem that we have. Somehow we have we've taken a road that we're not shown interest in tragedy or what's going to happen. Oh my God, why do I have to go see it? It's a film that doesn't educate. Doesn't entertain me. And all I have to say to that is, hopefully, as we get older, we'll understand and we'll educate our kids to make sure to go and support and see these films. And I don't care what they are, what color, what religion.
The genocide in 1915, man, was that an ugly scene. 100 years ago, over 2 million Armenians lived in Turkey, now less than 100,000. It was in 1894 that the Turks and Kurds got war, killed too many Armenians for the world to ignore. The reason for so much hate? The Turks felt the Armenians would dominate and create a separate state. In 2 years, 100,000 killed, so much blood spilled. Total extermination was attempted 20 years later. Before they were harmed, the Armenians were disarmed and forced to dig their own graves. Deportees were refused access to water. The men taken away and shot like lambs to the slaughter. Bodies put in wells covered with lime and soil. Just reading about it made my blood boil.
Man's inhumanity to man. What an unusual statement that is. It's a paradox, actually. How can we be both human and yet inhuman at the same time? It's almost poetic. And perhaps the most heinous act of man's inhumanity to man is the genocide, the intentional murder of unarmed and helpless people by a government because of their identity. This evening, we have speakers who will discuss the genocide in the Darfur region of Sudan. This is perhaps the most recent episode of genocide that is still going on today, even as I speak.
They've put these skulls on display, and there's a reason for this. You see, this is how they died. You see those skulls that are smashed? These were hit by hammers. One of the ladies came up to me, and this is something that I learned. I learned that the word machete is not a noun only. It is a verb. You are macheted to death. I didn't understand this until one of the ladies, one of the orphans, told me. She said she had to watch her mother be macheted to death. She says, you got to understand, Father, that a machete does not cut the head off. It's not sharp. You have to hack at the head until the head comes off. You see the cracks on the heads. That's why I'm telling you, when you talk about inhumanity, that word does not even come close to what these people are doing.
I represent an organization that's dedicated to helping young adolescents think about the world today by looking at history and human behavior, by looking at the choices and the decisions that people made in the past, so that when we look and confront genocide and mass violence and the episodes that we see both in history and today, young students begin to understand that they did not have to happen. The Armenian genocide did not have to happen. The Cambodian genocide did not have to happen. The Holocaust did not have to happen. The Rwandan genocide did not have to happen. They were not inevitable. They happened because individuals and groups made choices and decisions, allowed them to happen.
Today's event is focusing on man's inhumanity to man. And it is events like this that raise the public's awareness and collective consciousness about the terrible atrocities that have occurred centuries past, in the recent century, and even continuing today throughout the world. Some of the images that you're going to see today are going to be quite graphic in nature, and yes, they graphically depict man's inhumanity to man.
This was a group of widows. I shared this picture with you last year, and I love this picture because it just says so much about what it's all about when you talk about the word inhumanity. This was a group of widows, and I went up to them, and we were talking to them. The gentleman that was translating for me got up and he talked to them, and he said, this man is from America. He says, how many of you are widows? And every one of them raised their hand. And then he asked the next question, which they're answering over there. He said, how many of you have HIV/AIDS? And that's what they're answering right there.
We have a dialogue between American ambassador to Turkey, Henry Morgenthau, and one of the leaders of the Committee of Union and Progress, Talat. And Morgenthau frequently did meet with leadership of the Committee of Union and Progress and protested the treatment of Christians and particularly the plight of the Armenians. Morgenthau is recalling this in his memoir, and he says, I began to talk about the Armenians at Konya. I had hardly started when Talat's attitude became even more belligerent. His eyes lighted up. He brought his jaws together, leaned over toward me, and snapped out, are they Americans? The implications of this question were hardly diplomatic. It was merely a way of telling me that the matter was none of my business. Morgenthau brings this up. I do not appeal to you in the name of any race or any religion, but merely as a human being. You have told me many times that you want to make Turkey a part of the modern progressive world. The way you are treating the Armenians will not help you to realize that ambition. It puts you in the class of backward, reactionary peoples.
In this world of ours, there is no lack of examples of man's inhumanity to man. My ancestors emigrated from Ireland to escape a sad history of poverty, disease, and death. Our Holocaust was the Great Irish Famine, which was responsible for decimating our population, and over 25% of the Irish people either died or were forced into emigration at the time. In Ireland, they call it An Gorta Mór, which meant the Great Hunger. It happened in the late 1840s, where Ireland suffered a series of failures of the potato crop. These potatoes were attacked by a fungus from America, which turned the potatoes into inedible poisonous mush.
How do artists visually articulate a calamity, such as genocide endured by their people? Can such a calamity be represented by artists who have not experienced it firsthand? And finally, how is their visual production an instrument to confront this historical memory as they construct their diasporic identities? To address these questions, I consider the visual strategies employed by Los Angeles-based artists of Armenian descent in responding to the tragedy they inherited as heirs of a forcibly displaced people. These artists were indeed secondary witnesses to post-genocide life, and certainly experienced its effect on their families, their own lives, their identities. Their story is also important. In fact, I believe the story of the Armenian genocide is actually incomplete without an account of its impact on subsequent generations.
I think the common theme in the first two presentations and why they were so powerful is as you're witnessing what's going on, you feel a connection with the people involved. And in order to pull back and think and harken back to the original question posed by Ara is how can man behave inhumanly to other people? How can we do this thing? Why this happens, why this is so powerful to us in this room. And that's because we identify with everyone that was pictured and everyone that was discussed as human beings. The only way we can truly act inhumanly is when we create non-humans.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ara Najarian. I'm a city council member. I am the chair of the annual commemorative events program for the city of Glendale. I am so happy to see so many concerned art lovers and supporters of man's inhumanity to man and our annual commemorative events here today. This is a unique event. It's a collection of art pieces that all deal with probably the darkest chapter of human history. I'd like to say it's a chapter that is closed, but unfortunately I think we all have to agree that it is not closed. It's a chapter that's continuing to be written, and it's only through recognizing and reading pages out of the chapter of that dark history that it's our hope that mankind will realize what tragedies we can bestow on mankind, man's inhumanity to Man.
I'm very happy that this exhibition exists because it's not about the Armenian genocide, it's not about the Holocaust, it's not about Darfur, it's not about Cambodia, it's about all of them. They are all equally inhumane, and they're all atrocities. And really it's through exhibitions like this where all of you can come and see what's happening and how artists and how people feel about these kinds of events.
Myself and my friend Levon Paryan have done this piece about the aftermath, really, of the Armenian genocide. After survivors survive and they come back and they're trying to raise families again, what do? They tell stories. And our work is about photographs of them, of their faces, of their eyes, of their hands that tell their story. Also about their stories of what happened to them in the genocide. And so they are really the carriers of the memory of the aftermath of this catastrophe. And they're the ones who pass it on generation to generation, and it remains sort of in the, let's say, the national consciousness of a people who have been traumatized by such events through these stories.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 2010 annual events of awareness of the man's inhumanity to man. The city of Glendale, in commemoration of the Armenian genocide, has recognized the month of April as the month of remembrance, reflection, and awareness.
This evening's event is a night of poetry. We hope that the words and the emotions move you to help us recognize that inhumanity must never continue. It is a black page in our past. Many civilizations have taken the evil route of inhumanity towards their brothers. We're hoping that through making us all aware of this and these terrible deeds, that they will never be repeated again.
The entire night, frantic and queasy, I dreamt of the sun. No sound or whisper was around me. All was pale, night and moon.
Ես երազեցի արևի ոսկին.
They have buried 10 million mines in Afghanistan, one landmine for every 2 or 3 Afghans, regardless of age or ethnic background. They have planted death in the womb of the mother. Prosthetic limbs are airdropped with food. They have planted a mine under God's pillow and his dreams of doves. Every night, a new dark dream spreads its wings in my sleep.
But in China,
As of this year, it's close to for every 100 women born, for every 100 girls, there are 140 boys, 140 men. So that means those 40 men have no chance of finding a wife in China. So it's in some areas, it's a severe enough problem that China is realizing they have a big social issue coming from a whole lot of angry, unmarried, unmarriageable men. There's another side to that issue, though. It's not just that these men can't get married. It's also that in a country like China that doesn't have a social security system, your children are the ones who take care of you when you get older. So if you can't get married and can't have children, who takes care of you when you're older? Big problem, right? That's one of the things that leads to bride buying.
Let me assure you that slavery is alive and well today. As we heard earlier, there's about 27 million people currently enslaved in the world today. That's more people enslaved now than at any other point in history.
I hope that the events that you've just seen have as profound an effect on you as they've had on me over the past 9 years. Genocide is a term coined by Raphael Lemkin, a Polish writer. It comes from the word genos, which is Greek, meaning race, and side, from Latin, meaning the killing. Genocide must never occur. We're hoping that through these events that everyone remembers. And our city council, each and every one of us, over the past 9 years, have all been committed towards making genocide and Holocaust and atrocities of man versus man something that we're all aware of, and hoping that we can play our role in educating our youth and educating our neighbors across the world that it must never occur again.